The stars stretched endlessly, their cold, distant light casting a serene glow over the void of space. Yet beneath their tranquil beauty, something dark and foreboding stirred. The silence of the cosmos was deceptive, masking the chaos that awaited. Captain Sarah Thompson stood on the bridge of the UES Valor, her sharp gaze fixed on the holographic display in front of her. The air in the room was tense, heavy with the weight of the unknown. Around her, the crew worked in hushed urgency, their faces etched with worry. The final transmission from the exploration vessel Quest played once more, its fractured, desperate words cutting through the stillness like a blade. Unknown ships attacking. No response. Mayday. And then, silence. The recording ended, leaving only the soft hum of the ship's systems. Thompson's jaw tightened as she replayed the words in her mind. The Quest had been a peaceful vessel, its mission one of exploration and discovery. Now, it was gone, its crew likely lost. Approaching Proxima 438b's system, Captain, Lieutenant Daniel Kim reported, his voice steady despite the unease that flickered in his dark eyes. No sign of the Quest, but, he hesitated, his fingers dancing over the console as he brought up a visual feed. Thompson turned her attention to the screen. Her breath caught. 12 massive ships hung in the void, their golden hulls gleaming like ancient relics forged by gods. Each ship was a masterpiece of alien design, their surfaces etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shimmer and shift in the light of distant stars. They floated in perfect formation, silent and unmoving, like predators waiting for their prey to draw closer. "They're just sitting there," Kim murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're not sitting," Thompson corrected, her tone grim. "They're watching." A chill ran through the bridge as the realization sank in. Whoever, or whatever, these beings were, they had been waiting for them. "Open a channel," Thompson ordered, her voice firm despite the unease that coiled in her chest. The screen flickered, and an alien figure appeared. The bridge fell silent, every eye fixed on the being that now filled the display. The creature was tall and slender, its silver skin glistening like liquid metal. Its eyes were unlike anything human, swirling galaxies of light and shadow, as if the entire universe had been captured within their depths. The alien radiated an aura of authority, its presence almost suffocating. "I am High Overseer Nexar of the Zelarian Dominion," the being declared, its voice smooth and cold, carrying an edge of disdain. "You dare enter our domain, humans? You trespass upon the realm of gods." The words hung in the air, heavy with arrogance and menace. Around the bridge, the crew exchanged uneasy glances. "We come in peace," Ambassador Emily Carter said, stepping forward. Her voice was calm, diplomatic, though there was a slight tremor beneath her words. "We are explorers, seeking knowledge and understanding. We mean no harm." Nexar's lips curled into something that might have been a smile, though there was no warmth in it. "Peace," he repeated, the word dripping with mockery. "Your kind does not understand peace. You are insects, crawling in the dirt, blind to the greatness above you." Before Carter could respond, Nexar raised a hand, and the screen shifted. A new image appeared, a recording of the Quest. The crew watched in stunned silence as the peaceful exploration ship came into view, its sleek form dwarfed by the towering Zelarian vessels. Without warning, golden beams of energy lanced out, striking the Quest with devastating precision. The ship's shields flared briefly before collapsing under the onslaught. In the next moment, the Quest was gone, obliterated in a blinding explosion of light. The recording continued, showing escape pods launching from the wreckage. But the Zelarian ships showed no mercy. The golden beams struck again, one by one, turning the pods into nothing more than glowing debris. The bridge of the Valor was deathly silent, Thompson's hands curled into fists at her sides, her nails biting into her palms. "This is what happens to those who defy us," Nexar said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You have one solar cycle to surrender your planet. Kneel before the Dominion, or face annihilation." The screen went dark, leaving the crew to grapple with the horror they had just witnessed. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of Nexar's ultimatum hung over them like a storm cloud, pressing down on their chests. "Captain," Kim said quietly, breaking the silence. "What do we do?" Thompson's gaze hardened, her voice steady and unyielding. "We do not kneel," she said, her words cutting through the tension like a blade. The bridge seemed to draw strength from her resolve. Around her, the crews straightened, their fear giving way to determination. Thompson turned to Kim. "Prepare the ship for battle. If they want to see what humanity is capable of, we'll show them." As the Valor moved closer to the Zelarian fleet, the stars outside seemed to dim, their light swallowed by the shadow of the golden ships. The calm of the cosmos was gone, replaced by the quiet hum of a warship preparing for the fight of its life. And in the midst of it all, Thompson stood tall, her voice carrying the weight of humanity's defiance. "We will not kneel." The void of space was alive with tension, the stars dimmed by the oppressive presence of the Zelarian fleet. 12 golden ships surrounded the Valor, their surfaces gleaming like celestial monuments, their intricate patterns glowing faintly as if pulsating with divine energy. They were vast, dwarfing the human warship, and radiated an air of absolute superiority. Inside the Valor, the atmosphere was electric. The hum of the ship's systems was drowned out by the hurried voices of the crew, their movements quick and precise as they prepared for the confrontation. Captain Sarah Thompson stood at the center of it all, her gaze fixed on the enemy ships displayed on the holographic screen before her. Nexar's voice cut through the air, smooth and mocking, as if he were speaking from the heavens themselves. "What can one ship do against the gods?" The words echoed in the minds of the crew, heavy with disdain and arrogance. For a moment, the bridge was silent, the weight of the challenge sinking in. But Thompson's eyes burned with determination. She turned to her crew, her voice steady and commanding. "Find me a way," she said simply. Lieutenant Daniel Kim, his sharp mind already working, scanned the Zelarian ships for any sign of weakness. His fingers moved quickly, his brow furrowed in concentration. The alien vessels were unlike anything humanity had encountered before, ancient, powerful, and seemingly flawless. But Kim knew that no system was perfect. "Captain," he said, his voice breaking the silence. "Their shields, they cycle power every 7 seconds. There's a brief window where they are vulnerable." Thompson nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Good. Let's use it." Meanwhile, Chief Engineer Alex Morgan was analyzing the Zelarian weapons, his mind racing as he studied their patterns. The golden beams that had destroyed the Quest were devastating, but Morgan noticed inconsistencies, small inefficiencies in their energy output. "They are using old tech," he muttered, almost to himself. "Advanced, sure, but they don't fully understand it. They are relying on fear more than precision." Thompson's voice rang out. "Then let's show them what precision looks like." The Zelarian ships began their attack, their golden beams slicing through the darkness like spears of divine wrath. The energy struck the Valor's shields, creating brilliant bursts of light that illuminated the bridge in flashes of gold. The ship shook under the assault, but the shields held, their adaptive technology absorbing and redistributing the energy. The crew worked with relentless focus, their movements synchronized as they executed Thompson's orders. Kim timed the shield cycles perfectly, directing the Valor's weapons to exploit the brief vulnerabilities. Morgan adjusted the ship's energy output, ensuring their counterattacks hit with maximum efficiency. Fire! Thompson commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. The Valor unleashed its weapons, beams of concentrated energy lancing out toward the nearest Zealarian ship. For a moment, the golden vessel seemed to resist, its shields glowing brightly as they absorbed the attack. But then, in a sudden, blinding explosion, the ship's hull shattered, fragments of golden metal scattering into the void. The bridge erupted in a mix of shock and triumph. For the first time in 3,000 years, a Zealarian warship had fallen. On the screen, Nexar's face appeared, his swirling galaxy-like eyes wide with disbelief. "Impossible," he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "We are gods." Thompson's reply was sharp and cold, her words cutting through Nexar's arrogance like a blade. "You're just another empire that got too comfortable at the top." The Zealarian fleet hesitated, their movements faltering as the realization of their vulnerabilities sank in. The Valor pressed its advantage, striking again and again, each attack timed to exploit the shield cycles. Another ship fell, its golden hull consumed by fire and debris. But the Zealarians were not defeated yet. Their remaining ships regrouped, their attacks growing more coordinated and relentless. The Valor shook under the onslaught, its shields straining against the continuous barrage. "Captain, shields are at 40%. Kim reported, his voice tight with urgency. Thompson's grip on the console tightened, her mind racing as she calculated their next move. They couldn't afford to retreat, not now, not when they had proven that the Zealarians could bleed. "Hold the line," she ordered. "We're not done yet." The battle raged on, the void of space lit by the clash of energy beams and explosions. The Valor danced between the Zealarian ships, its movements precise and calculated as it evaded their attacks and struck back with unyielding force. Inside the ship, the crew fought not just with their skills, but with their resolve. Every strike, every maneuver was driven by the knowledge that humanity's survival depended on their success. They were not just fighting for themselves, they were fighting for Earth, for the millions of lives that Nexar had threatened to destroy. As another Zealarian ship exploded, its golden fragments scattering like fallen stars, Thompson allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. They had done the impossible, they had faced the so-called gods and proven that humanity would not kneel. But the battle was far from over. The remaining Zealarian ships began to retreat, their movements deliberate and calculated. Nexar's voice echoed once more, his tone no longer mocking, but filled with cold fury. "This is not over," he said. "You will regret defying us." Thompson met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "We'll be ready," she replied. As the Zealarian fleet disappeared into the darkness, the crew of the Valor stood in silence, their hearts pounding with the adrenaline of victory. They had survived the first battle, but they knew that the war was just beginning. And in the depths of space, the stars seemed to shine brighter, as if bearing witness to humanity's defiance. The battle was chaos, a storm of light and destruction in the endless void of space. The Valor danced through the carnage, its weapons blazing, its shields trembling under the relentless assault of the Zealarian fleet. The golden ships loomed like celestial predators, their beams of energy slicing through the darkness, but the humans fought with a ferocity born of desperation and hope. And then, everything changed. A ripple tore through the fabric of space, a silent wave that seemed to shatter reality itself. The stars dimmed, their light swallowed by an immense shadow that grew and grew until it consumed the battlefield. The air on the Valor's bridge felt heavy, as if the very universe was holding its breath. From the heart of this rupture, a ship emerged, if it could even be called a ship. It was vast, dwarfing even the mighty Zealarian vessels, its surface a shimmering cascade of colors that defied comprehension. Its shape was fluid, shifting and twisting as though it were alive, its edges glowing with a soft, otherworldly light. Strange symbols pulsed across its hull, ancient and unknowable, their meaning just out of reach, like a forgotten dream. The crew of the Valor stared in awe, their fear momentarily eclipsed by the sheer majesty of what they were witnessing. This was no ordinary vessel. It radiated power, not the crude, destructive kind wielded by the Xelorians, but something deeper, older, a force that seemed to hum with the very essence of creation. On the Xelorian flagship, Nexar's arrogance crumbled. His swirling eyes widened, his silver skin paling as he whispered in a voice barely audible, "The ancestors." The Xelorian fleet, so confident moments before, faltered. Their golden ships, once symbols of invincibility, now seemed small and insignificant in the presence of this ancient behemoth. Without a word, they turned and fled, their engines flaring as they vanished into the void. There was no fight, no bravado, only fear. On the Valor, the silence was deafening. The crew exchanged nervous glances, their earlier triumph overshadowed by the arrival of this new, unknowable entity. Thompson's voice broke the stillness, steady but tinged with awe. "Hold position," she ordered, her eyes never leaving the massive ship. And then, it spoke. Not in words, not in sound, but in thought. The crew felt it in their minds, a flood of symbols and images that bypassed language and spoke directly to their souls. The sensation was overwhelming, like standing at the edge of an infinite abyss and feeling it gaze back at you. The message was clear, yet profound in its simplicity. *, we are the Watchers. You have awakened us. *. The symbols lingered, filling the air with an almost sacred weight. Thompson's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to process the enormity of what was happening. These beings, these Watchers, were not just ancient. They were primordial, their presence a reminder of how small humanity truly was. As the crew stood in stunned silence, the Watchers revealed the truth. Images flooded their minds, stars being born, planets forming, life emerging in the darkness. The Watchers had been there from the beginning, seeding life across the galaxy, nurturing it, guiding it. But they had not stayed. They had left, retreating to the edges of existence, leaving their creations to grow on their own. And then, the images darkened. The Xelorians appeared, their golden ships rising from the ruins of a forgotten world. They had found the relics of the Watchers, ancient technologies left behind as gifts for the worthy. But instead of using these gifts to create, to build, the Xelorians had used them to conquer. They had declared themselves gods, wielding stolen power to enslave and dominate, their arrogance blinding them to the truth. The final image was of Earth, fragile and blue, its people standing defiant against the so-called gods. The Watcher's voice returned, resonating with a quiet, ancient sadness. *, the Xelorians have betrayed their purpose. They are not gods. They are thieves. *, a crystalline artifact appeared before the Valor, suspended in the void. It glowed with a soft, inner light, its surface etched with the same shifting symbols that adorned the Watcher's ship. The crew felt its significance immediately, an almost instinctive understanding that this was more than a weapon, it was a key, a truth that could shatter the Xelorians' false divinity. "Take this," the Watchers said. *, it is the truth. Use it. And their false godhood. *. Thompson stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the artifact. It was beautiful and terrible, its light casting strange shadows across the bridge. She felt its weight in her mind, the responsibility it carried. This was no simple task. To wield the truth was to risk everything. But there was no hesitation in her voice as she spoke. "We'll do what needs to be done." The Watchers did not reply, but their presence lingered, a silent acknowledgement of humanity's resolve. Slowly, Their ship began to retreat, its form dissolving into the void until it was gone, leaving only the artifact and the faint hum of its power. The crew of the Valor stood in silence, the weight of their mission settling over them. They had faced gods and survived. Now, they carried the truth of the universe in their hands. And somewhere, in the depths of space, the Xelorians waited, their empire built on lies trembling as the ancestors' judgment loomed ever closer. The artifact hovered in the center of the Valor's command room, its crystalline surface glowing with an inner light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Strange symbols danced across its facets, shifting and rearranging themselves in patterns too complex to comprehend. The air around it was heavy, charged with an energy that felt ancient and alive, as if the artifact itself were aware of the role it was about to play. Captain Thompson stood before it, her expression a mixture of determination and awe. The crew watched in silence, each of them feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a weapon or a tool, it was the truth, raw and unfiltered, a light that would expose the shadows the Xelorians had hidden behind for millennia. "Activate it," Thompson said softly, her voice steady but laced with the gravity of what was to come. The artifact responded instantly, as if it had been waiting for her command. Its glow intensified, filling the room with a blinding brilliance that seemed to pierce through the walls of the ship, reaching out into the void. The crew shielded their eyes as the light expanded, spreading across the galaxy with unimaginable speed. And then, the visions began. Every sentient being in the galaxy, human, Xelorian, and countless others, felt it at once. The truth poured into their minds, not as words or images, but as a deep knowing, an undeniable understanding of the Xelorians' origins. They saw the Xelorians as they once were, a primitive race, huddled on a barren world, their survival hanging by a thread. They were not gods, not divine beings, but mortals who had stumbled upon the artifacts of the ancestors. The visions revealed their greed, their hunger for power, and their willingness to twist the ancestors' gifts into tools of domination. The galaxy watched as the Xelorians built their empire, not through wisdom or strength, but through lies and fear. They declared themselves gods, using stolen technology to subjugate countless worlds, their golden ships and radiant weapons symbols of a power they did not truly possess. The truth was undeniable, and it shattered the illusion the Xelorians had so carefully crafted. On enslaved worlds, the reaction was immediate. The oppressed, who had lived under the Xelorians' rule for generations, felt the chains of fear begin to break. For the first time, they saw their oppressors for what they truly were: frauds, no different from the mortals they had enslaved. Rebellions erupted like wildfire. On countless planets, the downtrodden rose up, their voices echoing with the fury of centuries of oppression. They tore down statues of their so-called gods, destroyed the symbols of Xelorian rule, and turned the stolen technology against their former masters. The Xelorian dominion, once unshakable, began to crumble. Entire fleets were abandoned as their crews mutinied, refusing to fight for the lies they had been fed. Xelorian governors and overseers, once worshipped as divine emissaries, were dragged from their palaces and forced to face the wrath of those they had enslaved. On the Valor, the crew watched as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The holographic display was a patchwork of images: burning Xelorian banners, cheering crowds, and desperate messages from rebel leaders seeking guidance. Thompson stood at the center of it all, her expression calm but resolute. She knew this was only the beginning. The Xelorians' reign was ending, but the galaxy was teetering on the edge of chaos. Without careful guidance, the vacuum left by their fall could easily be filled by new tyrants. "We have to help them," she said, her voice firm. "But we're liberators, not conquerors. We don't replace one tyranny with another." Her words were a reminder to her crew, but also to herself. Humanity had won a great victory, but with it came great responsibility. They had to tread carefully, ensuring their actions brought freedom, not more oppression. Thompson reached out to the rebel leaders, her messages carried across the galaxy by the same technology that had broadcast the truth. She offered support supplies, intelligence, and guidance, but made it clear that humanity had no interest in ruling. "This is your fight," she told them. "We're here to help, but the future of your worlds is in your hands." The rebels listened. Inspired by humanity's defiance and the truth of the ancestors, they began to organize, forming alliances and laying the groundwork for a new era. It was messy, chaotic, and fraught with tension, but it was progress. The Xelorians, meanwhile, were in disarray. Their fleets were scattered, their leaders divided, their once mighty empire reduced to a shadow of its former self. Nexar, the self-proclaimed god, was nowhere to be found. Some said he had fled to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, while others believed he was hiding among the ruins of his empire, clinging to the last vestiges of his power. But the galaxy no longer feared him. The truth had set them free, and no amount of lies could undo what had been revealed. As the Valor drifted through the void, its crew watched the galaxy begin to heal. It was a slow and painful process, but it was real. For the first time in millennia, there was hope, a fragile, flickering light in the darkness. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear: the age of gods was over. The age of truth had begun. The galaxy burned with the fire of rebellion. The once mighty Xelorian dominion, a vast empire built on fear and lies, now crumbled under the weight of its own arrogance. For centuries, their golden fleets had been symbols of invincibility, their shimmering ships spreading terror wherever they went. But now, those same ships were scattered, their formations broken, their commanders scrambling to regain control. The Xelorians, so reliant on their stolen technology and rigid doctrines, found themselves vulnerable. Their tactics, once effective against disorganized resistance, were no match for the coordinated strikes of humanity and the rebel forces. Human ships, sleek and deadly, moved through the void like predators, their attacks precise and devastating. They targeted key Xelorian outposts, supply lines, and shipyards, dismantling the Dominion piece by piece. On the ground, the fight was no less fierce. Slave camps, once symbols of Xelorian dominance, became battlegrounds where hope clashed with despair. Major Chris Walker, a seasoned soldier with a voice that carried both authority and compassion, led the charge. His boots hit the scorched earth of one such camp, the air thick with the stench of suffering and the cries of the oppressed. The camp was a grim sight. Rows of skeletal figures, their spirits broken by years of servitude, huddled in the shadows of towering Xelorian overseers. The guards, clad in their golden armor, barked orders, and brandished their weapons, their arrogance unshaken even as the tide of battle turned against them. Walker's forces struck with the fury of the oppressed. Rebel fighters, many of them former slaves, fought alongside humanity's soldiers, their rage fueling their every move. The camp erupted into chaos as the enslaved rose up, seizing weapons and turning them against their captors. Amid the chaos, Walker stood tall, his voice cutting through the din like a beacon. "Freedom isn't given," he roared, his words echoing across the battlefield. "It's taken." His words ignited something in the hearts of the enslaved. They surged forward, their fear replaced by a desperate, unyielding determination. The Xelorian guards, so accustomed to submission, faltered. One by one, they fell, their golden armor tarnished by the blood of their victims. Elsewhere, the rebellion reached its crescendo. The turning point came in the cold void of space, where the Xelorian flagship, a massive vessel adorned with symbols of false divinity, found itself surrounded. The ship, once a symbol of the Dominion's power, now drifted helplessly, its engines disabled, its weapons silenced. Inside, High Overseer Nexar paced the command deck, his silver skin glistening with sweat. His once commanding presence was now overshadowed by desperation. Around him, his elite guards whispered among themselves, their loyalty wavering as the reality of their situation became clear. Nexar's voice, usually calm and composed, was now a frantic snarl. "Hold your positions," he barked, his swirling eyes darting between the holographic displays showing the encircling rebel forces. "We are gods. They cannot touch us." But his words rang hollow. One by one, his guards abandoned him, their golden armor clattering to the floor as they fled. Nexar was left alone, his defiance echoing in the empty chamber. On the Valor, Captain Thompson watched the scene unfold through intercepted transmissions. The sight of Nexar, once so untouchable, now reduced to a desperate figure clinging to his delusions, filled her with a sense of grim satisfaction. She opened a channel, her voice calm but laced with steel. "High Overseer Nexar," she said, her words carrying the weight of the countless lives he had destroyed. Nexar froze, his swirling eyes narrowing as he turned toward the source of the voice. "You dare address me," he hissed, his tone venomous. "I am a god. You are nothing but insects." Thompson's reply was swift and cutting. "You're nothing but thieves hiding behind stolen power," she said, her voice cold and unyielding. "Your lies are over, Nexar. The galaxy sees you for what you are." Nexar's defiance faltered. For the first time, he seemed small, his grandeur stripped away by the truth. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The silence that followed was deafening, a final, crushing blow to his delusions of divinity. The flagship was boarded moments later. Rebel forces, led by humanity's finest, stormed the ship, their determination unshakable. Nexar, once surrounded by legions of loyal followers, now stood alone. He fought, his stolen technology giving him strength beyond that of any mortal, but it was not enough. The rebels overwhelmed him, their combined strength breaking through his defenses. As Nexar fell, the galaxy seemed to exhale. The rebellion had won its greatest victory, and the Dominion's fall was all but assured. But even in victory, Thompson and her crew knew the fight was far from over. The galaxy was free, but freedom was fragile. The scars left by the Zealarians would take generations to heal, and the void left by their fall could easily be filled by new oppressors. Still, in that moment, there was hope. The Zealarian Dominion, an empire built on lies, had been brought to its knees. And for the first time in millennia, the galaxy stood united not under the rule of false gods, but under the banner of truth and freedom. The chamber was vast, its walls carved from a dark, ancient stone that seemed to drink in the light. A dome of shimmering energy arched overhead, allowing the stars to gaze down upon the proceedings. This was no ordinary courtroom, it was a place of reckoning, a sacred space where the voices of the oppressed would finally be heard. At the center of the room, High Overseer Nexar stood shackled, his once pristine silver skin dulled and marred by the weight of his defeat. His swirling, otherworldly eyes once filled with arrogance now darted nervously around the chamber. The chains that bound him glowed faintly, humming with energy, a reminder that even his stolen power could not save him here. The Council of Liberated Species sat in a semicircle before him, their faces a tapestry of anger, grief, and quiet determination. They represented worlds that had suffered under the Zealarian Dominion, peoples who had endured centuries of enslavement, exploitation, and lies. Each of them bore the scars of their oppression, some visible, others buried deep within their hearts. The air was thick with tension as the first witness stepped forward. She was an elderly woman from a world long forgotten by the galaxy, her frail frame draped in simple robes. Her voice trembled as she spoke, recounting the horrors her people had endured, the forced labor, the destruction of their culture, the children taken from their families to serve the Xelorians as living tools. They told us they were gods, she said, her voice breaking. They said our suffering was a divine plan, that we should be grateful for the chance to serve them. But there was no divinity in their cruelty. Only greed. Her words hung in the air like a blade, cutting deep into the hearts of all who listened. Nexar's expression twisted, a flicker of shame crossing his face before he quickly masked it with defiance. One by one, the survivors came forward, each testimony a piece of the shattered mosaic of the Xelorian Dominion's legacy. A young man spoke of the destruction of his home world, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. A mother wept as she described the loss of her children, taken to serve in the Xelorian fleets. An elder from a distant star system recounted how his people had been forced to worship the Xelorians as gods, their history erased, their identity stolen. And then Rax stepped forward. The reptilian leader moved with a quiet dignity, his scaled form glinting faintly in the starlight. His eyes, dark and piercing, locked onto Nexar with a gaze that seemed to strip away the High Overseer's defenses. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady, each word carrying the weight of centuries of pain. "You made my people believe we were born to serve," Rax said, his tone sharp as a blade. "You poisoned our minds, made us worship you as gods while you drained our world of its life. That was your greatest crime, not the chains, not the whips, but the lies. You stole our pride, our history, our very souls." The chamber fell silent, the weight of Rax's words pressing down on everyone present. Even Nexar, for all his arrogance, seemed shaken. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. What defense could he offer? The truth had already condemned him. The council deliberated for what felt like an eternity, though in reality, it was only hours. When they returned, their decision was unanimous. "Nexar," the lead counselor announced, her voice ringing with authority, "you are guilty of crimes against the galaxy. For centuries, you and your dominion have enslaved, exploited, and destroyed. You claim to be gods, but you are nothing more than thieves and tyrants." Nexar stood motionless, his expression a mask of cold defiance. "Your punishment," the counselor continued, "is a lifetime of service. You will dedicate the rest of your existence to rebuilding the worlds you destroyed, to restoring what your empire took away. You will not do so as a god, but as a servant, a reminder to all of what happens when power is abused." The sentence was met with a heavy silence, followed by a ripple of quiet approval. It was not vengeance, but justice, a chance for Nexar to confront the consequences of his actions, to see the faces of those he had wronged and to work, day by day, to undo the damage he had caused. As the council declared the Xelorian Dominion officially dissolved, a collective sigh of relief seemed to sweep through the chamber. It was the end of an era, a dark chapter in the galaxy's history finally closed. Nexar was led away, his chains clinking softly in the stillness. He did not resist, but his head remained high, his pride refusing to bow even in defeat. Yet there was something in his eyes now, a flicker of fear, perhaps, or the dawning realization of what lay ahead. For the survivors, it was not the end of their pain, but it was a beginning. The scars of the past would take time to heal, but for the first time in generations, there was hope. The false gods had fallen, and the galaxy was free to forge its own destiny. As the stars watched silently above, the chamber emptied, leaving behind only echoes of the voices that had spoken their truths. The trial of the gods was over, and justice had prevailed. The galaxy, once fractured by oppression and war, now buzzed with the sounds of rebuilding. The air on liberated worlds was thick with the hum of machinery and the voices of species working side by side. Where once there had been chains, there were now tools. Where there had been silence, There was now laughter. The scars of the Zelarian dominion ran deep, but in the aftermath of its fall, seeds of hope began to take root. Humanity, once seen as a fledgling race in the galactic order, stood at the forefront of this new era. Their resilience during the rebellion had earned them respect, and now they worked tirelessly to unite the liberated species. The Galactic Council was born a beacon of equality and cooperation. Its chambers were filled with representatives of countless worlds, their faces and forms as varied as the stars themselves. Each voice carried weight, no matter how small their world or how humble their origins. In the bustling council halls, debates rang out, sometimes heated, but always with a shared purpose. Former slaves, now free, sat beside Zelarians who had renounced their old ways. The tension between them was palpable at first, but necessity forced them to find common ground. Together, they began the monumental task of rebuilding the worlds that had been ravaged by centuries of tyranny. Amidst this effort was Dr. Amy Chen, a brilliant human scientist whose mind burned with curiosity and compassion. She stood in the ruins of an ancient Zelarian vault, her hands brushing against the cold, intricate carvings of ancestor technology. This was the same power the Zelarians had used to dominate the galaxy, but Amy saw something different in it: a chance to heal, not harm. With tireless dedication, she unlocked its secrets. Where the Zelarians had used the technology to enslave, Amy used it to create. Cities were rebuilt in days instead of years. Crops flourished on barren worlds, feeding the hungry. Diseases that had plagued entire species for generations were cured. The ancestor technology, once a tool of oppression, became a symbol of renewal. Out in the stars, mixed species crews worked together on exploration missions. Ships, once instruments of war, now carried scientists, engineers, and dreamers into the unknown. Aboard these vessels, beings of all shapes and sizes shared meals, stories, and laughter. They learned from one another, their differences no longer a source of division but a wellspring of strength. One ship, the Unity, became a symbol of this new era. Its crew was a kaleidoscope of life: humans, reptilian Raxians, feathered Avarians, and even a Zelarian engineer who had chosen to atone for his people's sins. Together, they ventured into the uncharted depths of the galaxy, their mission not to conquer, but to discover. For the first time in millennia, the galaxy was not ruled by fear but guided by hope. A year passed, and the galaxy was transformed. The wounds of the past had not fully healed, but the progress was undeniable. On Haven Station, a massive structure orbiting a serene blue planet, representatives from dozens of species gathered for a moment that would echo through history. The station's grand hall was a marvel of design, its walls adorned with symbols of every species present. The air shimmered with a quiet reverence as beings of all shapes and forms filled the chamber. Some were tall and imposing, their bodies covered in scales or fur, while others were small and delicate, their eyes wide with wonder. They had come from every corner of the galaxy, united by a shared purpose. At the center of the hall stood a single table, upon which lay the Galactic Charter, a document that represented the dreams of countless worlds. Its words were written in dozens of languages, each stroke of ink a promise of equality, unity, and peace. One by one, the representatives stepped forward to sign. A Raxian elder, her scales glinting like emeralds, pressed her claw to the document. An Avorian diplomat, his feathers shimmering with iridescent light, dipped his quill in ink and carefully etched his name. Even a Zelarian, his silver skin marked with the faint scars of his people's downfall, stood tall as he added his signature. When the last name was written, the lead counselor, a towering figure with crystalline skin that caught the light like a prism, raised her voice. "Let it be declared," she said, her tone resonating through the hall, "that no being is born superior to another. From this day forward, we stand as equals, bound not by fear, but by trust. The chamber erupted into applause, a chorus of cheers, roars, and songs that filled the station and echoed out into the stars. Among the crowd stood Captain Thompson, her once steely gaze now softened by age and reflection. She had retired from her command, but her presence still carried the weight of her role in the rebellion. As she watched the celebrations unfold, a sense of pride swelled within her. A young reporter approached, eager to capture her thoughts. "Captain Thompson," she asked, "what does this moment mean to you?" Thompson smiled, her eyes distant as she looked back on humanity's journey. "We refused to kneel," she said, her voice steady. "Not just for ourselves, but for everyone. And look what we built together." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of the galaxy's transformation. Far away, in the uncharted reaches of space, a new mission was beginning. A fleet of exploration ships, their hulls gleaming with the insignia of the Galactic Council, prepared to depart. Their destination, the remnants of the ancestors, the enigmatic beings whose technology had shaped the galaxy's history. On the bridge of the Unity, the crew stood ready. The captain, a young human who had grown up hearing stories of the rebellion, addressed his team. "We're not just exploring the stars," he said. "We're building a future for all of us." As the ships disappeared into the void, the galaxy looked to the future with hope. The age of false gods was over. The age of partnership had begun. And in the quiet of the stars, where once there had been war and despair, there was now only possibility.